Chapter 12, Joseph on trial again. The rise of the Church of Christ in these last days, being 1,830 years since the coming of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in the flesh, it being regularly organized and established agreeable to the laws of our country. In the 4th month, and on the 6th day of the month, which is called April, April 6, 1830. According to LDS history, this was the date the church formally organized at the home of Peter Whitmer Sr. In Fayette, New York. BYU professor John K. Carmack clarifies this account isn't entirely accurate. David Whitmer, years later, wrote, "It is all a mistake about the church being organized on April 6, 1830, as I will show. We were as fully organized, spiritually, before April 6th as we were on that day. The reason why we met on that day was this. The world had been telling us that we were not a regularly organized church, and we had no right to officiate in the ordinance of marriage, hold church property, etc., and that we should organize according to the laws of the land. The church wasn't being taken seriously. Their ordinances weren't legally recognized. As Carmack explains, the prophet Joseph felt he was complying with laws decreed by government for organizing a church. Divine law wasn't enough. Joseph had to formalize the church legally. This may explain the ongoing disagreement over whether the church was founded in Fayette or Palmyra. Even the Evening and the Morning Star and Orson Pratt's pamphlet suggest Manchester. The precise location doesn't matter. What matters, obtaining a proper charter under New York state law protected the new Church of Christ under the Freedom of Religion Act and offered legal protection to Joseph himself. Church of Christ, that was the first name. It wouldn't change until years later, after the move from New York to... The structure was rooted in the Book of Acts. Smith's version appears in D&C 3867. The offices he established would become crucial in subsequent years: elders, priests, teachers, and deacons. Smith proposed himself and Oliver Cowdery as the 2 highest elders. The first members sustained them by raising their hands, the origin of the practice still seen today. Within the first year, 6 members were excommunicated. The church urgently needed to grow. Local converts were few. Remember, the Smith family had a tarnished reputation, with Joseph found guilty in 1826 of being a disorderly person. Several churches existed and dissolved during Smith's time, yet he uniquely struggled to gain followers, perhaps because other founders didn't carry Joseph's controversial history. Return to Colesville. April 1830, Joseph returned to Colesville, home of Joseph Knight Sr., his treasure-digging acquaintance. The same location where he'd been arrested and brought to South Bainbridge 4 years earlier. Between May and June, Joseph sent his father and 2 brothers, Samuel and Don Carlos, on missions to convert new members. Joseph personally focused on recruiting potential leaders while leaving door-to-door conversions to lower-ranking followers. From History of the Church. During this month of April, I went on a visit to the residence of Mr. Joseph Knight of Colesville, Broome County, New York, with whom and his family I had been for some time acquainted. Mr. Knight and his family were Universalists, but were willing to reason with me upon my religious views, and were, as usual, friendly and hospitable. We held several meetings in the neighborhood. We had many friends and some enemies. Some enemies? Could these have been individuals involved in his 1826 trial? During this period, Smith sought to convert Knight, initially without success, until Knight's son, Newell Knight, came under what was described as demonic possession. The account from History of the Church, Vol. 1. Newell had said that he would try and take up his cross and pray vocally during meeting, but when we again met together, he rather excused himself. He would wait until he could get into the woods by himself, and there he would pray. Accordingly, he deferred praying until next morning, when he retired into the woods, where, according to his own account afterwards, he made several attempts to pray, but could scarcely do so. He began to feel uneasy and continued to feel worse both in mind and body, until, upon reaching his own house, his appearance was such as to alarm his wife very much. His visage and limbs distorted and twisted in every shape and appearance possible to imagine, and finally he was caught up off the floor of the apartment and tossed about most fearfully. This incident became the first claimed miracle of the Church of Christ. Joseph's handling. After he had thus suffered for a time, I succeeded in getting hold of him by the hand, when almost immediately he spoke to me, and with great earnestness requested me to cast the devil out of him, saying that he knew he was in him, and that he also knew that I could cast him out. I replied, "If you know that I can, it shall be done." And then almost unconsciously I rebuked the devil and commanded him in the name of Jesus Christ to depart from him, when immediately Newell spoke out and said that he saw the devil leave him and vanish from his sight. This event convinced Joseph Knight Sr. of Joseph's calling, at least according to Joseph and the LDS Church. Knight Sr., already a firm believer in the occult and participant in many treasure digs with Joseph as the seer, raises questions. Did this event truly take place, or was Knight simply one of those friends invested in potential Book of Mormon prophets? Regardless, the Knight family converted. A congregation in Colesville was established. The charges return. Joseph's teachings on Jesus and the restoration were angering people in Colesville. As he gained members, other congregations, local pastors viewed Joseph as a wolf in sheep's clothing. June 9, 1830, the first conference was held in Fayette. Unlike modern LDS conferences, these early meetings were occasions where high elders preached. The church reportedly numbered about 30 members. Late June, Joseph returned to Colesville to check on the new congregation. He faced renewed hostility. Some townsfolk formed a mob intending to capture him. Just as in 1826, Joseph was arrested, this time by Constable Ebenezer Hatch on June 30, 1830, again on charges of being a disorderly person. He was to face Justice Joseph P. Chamberlain. Here's the kicker. The clergy remembered Joseph's past, especially that 1826 trial, for what he was, a fraud who'd made a living deceiving people with his magic stones. Rumors of witchcraft swirled around him, further fueling hostility. When Smith showed up to preach, they weren't going to let him walk all over them. These towns were already on alert. The Horn of the Green Mountains, a Vermont paper, claimed Smith's influence over Martin Harris was due to Smith's hocus pocus. In New York, the Gem compared Smith and his followers to Salem witchcraftism and Jemima Wilkinsonianism. Abner Cole made witchcraft allegations in the Reflector, defining treasure seekers like Luman Walters and Joseph Smith as witches and wizards. The legal entanglements Joseph faced in 1830 weren't just about the Book of Mormon or founding a new religious movement. They were rooted in the same treasure-seeking past and use of magic that had already landed him in trouble. Local clergy, familiar with Smith's history of using seer stones for treasure hunting, quickly connected his past with his newly claimed divine mission. They weren't fooled. They saw this as a continuation of his earlier fraudulent activities. Dan Vogel backs this up. In 1830, Joseph Smith was still widely known for his treasure-seeking activities and his use of seer stones. This reputation made him a target of legal action, as communities already wary of his past felt that his religious claims were nothing more than an extension of earlier fraudulent practices. The legal troubles Smith faced in 1830 were not simply about religious freedom, but about the continued perception of him as a fraud. Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet, 2004. The trials, while Dylan escorted Smith to the wagon bound for South Bainbridge, the mob surrounded the vehicle and followed. According to Joseph Smith history, the wagon wheel had fallen off, and it seemed the mob was waiting for Hatch's signal to take Joseph and mete out their own justice. Hatch gave no such signal. They arrived in South Bainbridge without incident. Joseph remained concerned the mob might still pursue him, prompting Hatch to sleep with his feet against the door. Nothing occurred that night. Smith prepared for trial once more. Before we proceed, Joseph Knight Sr. paid for the lawyers defending Smith. Joseph was too poor to afford legal representation, a detail that will be significant. From History of the Church, Volume 1. Commenced amidst a multitude of spectators, who in general evinced a belief that I was guilty of all that had been reported concerning me, and of course were very zealous that I should be punished according to my crimes. Among many witnesses called up against me was Mr. Josiah Stoll, of whom I have made mention as having worked for him some time, and examined to the following effect. Did not the prisoner Joseph Smith have a horse of you? Yes. Did not he go to you and tell you that an angel had appeared unto him and authorized him to get the horse from you? No, he told me no such story. Well, how had he the horse of you? He bought him of me as any other man would. Have you had your pay? That is not your business. The question being again put, the witness replied, I hold his price of the horse, which I consider as good as the pay, For I am well acquainted with Joseph Smith Jun, and know him to be an honest man, and if he wishes, I am ready to let him have another horse on the same terms. Josiah Stowell, once again called to testify on Smith's behalf as in 1826, didn't fully incriminate Joseph. Smith, lacking funds, couldn't pay for a horse, but the promissory note kept him legally safe, since it could eventually be honored, though no attempts had been made. Stowell refused to confirm whether he'd received payment, making it difficult for the judge to secure a conviction. Jonathan Thompson also testified for Smith, having been one of the 3 witnesses in 1826. History of the Church Records. Mr. Jonathan Thompson was next called up and examined. Has not the prisoner, Joseph, had a yoke of oxen of you? Yes. Did he not obtain them of you by telling you that he had a revelation to the effect that he was to have them? No, he did not mention a word of the kind concerning the oxen. He purchased them the same as any other man would. Joseph had no money, relying on others' generosity. Thompson's testimony supported him. With Stowell and Thompson's accounts, one more surprise remained. Stowell's daughters were called to testify on Joseph's character. Rumors circulated that Joseph and the Stowell daughters had been involved intimately, some claiming all 3 together. If true, as a married man, Joseph would have been committing adultery, reinforcing the disorderly person charge. After a few more such attempts, detained for a time, in order that 2 young women, daughters of Mr. Stowell, with whom I had at times kept company, might be sent for, in order, if possible, to elicit something from them which might be made a pretext against me. The young ladies arrived and were severally examined touching my character and conduct in general, but particularly as to my behavior towards them, both in public and private, when they both bore such testimony in my favor as left my enemies without a pretext on their account. This was the Jacksonian era. Women were far more liberal regarding sexuality than today. For the Stowell daughters to admit to sexual activity would have been scandalous enough. To admit involvement with a married man? No wonder they claimed nothing happened. Whether it did or not is difficult to determine, but Joseph already had a reputation for infidelity. Less than a year later, he would begin discussing polygamy with Native American women on the frontier, but that's a story for 1831. Smith was found innocent due to lack of evidence, not because evidence was absent, but because it was insufficient to secure a conviction. He barely had time to leave South Bainbridge before being arrested again by Hatch on behalf of Justice Joel K. Nobel. Samuel Dickinson filed the same disorderly person charge. Fair LDS provides a different account with contradiction. He was immediately seized by some fiends from hell, his attorney's word, and a less sympathetic constable. He was rudely thrust into a wagon and driven 15 miles to neighboring Colesville, Broome County. He was given bread and water for food and handcuffed to the constable, who yanked him hard every time Joseph stirred during the night. But it was Constable Hatch who arrested Smith the second time. Fair previously claimed Hatch had been part of a conspiracy but changed his mind after being impressed by Joseph. Did Hatch change his mind again? They describe a less sympathetic constable treating Joseph poorly, yet it was Hatch who made the arrest. What of the alleged ill treatment? Joseph himself recounts, "We were at this time not far distant from my own house. I wished to be allowed the privilege of spending the night with my wife at home, offering any wished-for security for my appearance. But this was denied me. I applied for something to eat. The constable ordered me some crusts of bread and water, which was the only food I that night received. At length we retired to bed. The constable made me lie next the wall. He then laid himself down by me and put his arm around me, and upon my moving in the least, would clench me fast, fearing that I intended to escape from him. And in this very disagreeable manner did we pass the night." Joseph's request to spend the night with Emma was denied, standard procedure when someone is held for trial. Hatch, concerned Joseph might escape, had him lie against the wall with an arm around him, so any movement would wake the constable. Little evidence of mistreatment here, simply a constable performing his duty. Once again, due to lack of evidence, Smith was acquitted. An angry mob gathered as he was released, prompting Joseph and Oliver to be rushed into a back room by one of Joseph's attorneys, while the other attorney and Hatch confronted the mob. This seems less an act of malice from Hatch and more of him executing his responsibilities. Joseph and Oliver escaped through a back window and fled into the woods, arriving exhausted at their lodging 15 miles away. Priestcraft. Following this event, Isaac and his wife disowned Emma and Joseph, evicting them from their land. They returned to the Whitmers in Fayette during summer 1830, or so Fair states. More likely, Joseph remained in the Colesville area with the Knight family, while Oliver returned to preside over the Fayette branch. The timeline is murky. Some LDS sources place the eviction immediately after the trial, while others, along with non-LDS scholars, place it months later. Regardless, the event occurred. Joseph now faced financial hardship. Book of Mormon sales were weak. He had no land. He devised a new method to live free: priestcraft. What is priestcraft? A term unique to the Book of Mormon and LDS faith, referring to clergy profiting from their position. The practice became an issue for Oliver Cowdery because the Book of Mormon explicitly warns against it. 2 Nephi 26, 29, and 31. 29. He commandeth that there shall be no priestcrafts. For behold, priestcrafts are that men preach and set themselves up for a light unto the world, that they may get gain and praise of the world, but they seek not the welfare of Zion. 31. But the laborer in Zion shall labor for Zion, for if they labor for money, they shall perish. Joseph received a revelation concerning financial matters, instructing that whatever he needed could be taken from the church. He sent Oliver to Fayette to pronounce it to the members. Upon Oliver's arrival, issues arose. As primary scribe of the Book of Mormon and having done most of the typesetting, Oliver knew the contents intimately. He decided to write to Joseph, warning of a potential mistake. Here's Joseph's account. He wrote to inform me that he had discovered an error in one of the commandments, Book of Doctrine and Covenants, and truly manifest by their works that they have received of the Spirit of Christ unto a remission of their sins. The above quotation, he said, was erroneous, and he added, I command you in the name of God to erase those words, that no priestcraft be amongst us. I immediately wrote to him in reply, asking by what authority he took it upon himself to command me to alter or erase, to add to or diminish from, a revelation or commandment from Almighty God. Oliver Cowdery confronted Joseph via letter, and Joseph responded sharply. Joseph was asserting there was no authority above him. What he decreed was law. Oliver had likely been positioned as co-leader from the start, but Smith was unwilling to share ultimate authority. Joseph rebuked Oliver for his challenge. Oliver knew Joseph had erred before. Consider the failed Canadian copyright revelation. Perhaps this gave him leverage with the Whitmers. He had the Fayette branch behind him, prompting Joseph to travel there. Joseph recounts, a few days afterwards I visited him and Mr. Whitmer's family, when I found the family in opinion concerning the words above quoted, and it was not without both labor and perseverance that I could prevail with any of them to reason calmly on the subject. However, Christian Whitmer at length became convinced that the sentence was reasonable and according to Scripture, and finally, with his assistance, I succeeded in bringing not only the Whitmer family, but also Oliver Cowdery to acknowledge that they had been in error. An insurrection against Joseph by Oliver. Yet Joseph's persuasive skill and authority won. The timeline here is unclear. After this event, Smith was reportedly back in Harmony, during which Isaac Hale terminated his mortgage agreement. According to some historians, Joseph and Emma then moved to Fayette. Knight Sr. financed the move. Joseph and Emma likely stayed some time with the Knight family following their eviction and before fully relocating to Fayette, probably September 1830. The Seer Stone Showdown. Upon arriving in Fayette, Joseph faced a new leadership challenge. Members wanted guidance on the location of the New Jerusalem. As a restorationist movement, the New Zion was to be established on the American continent. Joseph had no. Within restoration movements, the gift of prophecy and revelation is believed to extend to any deemed worthy. Hiram Page, one of the 8 witnesses, claimed such a revelation concerning the New Jerusalem. Joseph couldn't allow this. If Page, not he, held the key revelation, it would imply Page held greater spiritual authority. Joseph reacted decisively. To our great grief, however, we soon found that Satan had been lying in wait to deceive and seeking whom he might devour. Brother Hiram Page had in his possession a certain stone, by which he had obtained certain revelations concerning the upbuilding of Zion, the order of the church, etc., all of which were entirely at variance with the order of God's house, as laid down in the New Testament, as well as in our late revelations. Like Hiram Page possessed a seer stone, which he used to gain these revelations. Smith, angered, forced Page to destroy his stone, eliminating any rival seer. Smith's justification: Page's revelation was of the devil, a stark parallel to his confrontation with Cowdery months earlier. Joseph continues, finding, however, that many, especially the Whitmer family and Oliver Cowdery, were believing much in the things set forth by this stone, we thought it best to inquire of the Lord concerning so important a matter, and before conference convened, we received the following. 1. Behold, I say unto thee, Oliver, that it shall be given unto thee that thou shalt be heard by the church in all things, whatsoever thou shalt teach them by the Comforter, concerning the revelations and commandments which I have given. Seb, but behold, verily, verily, I say unto thee, no one shall be appointed to receive commandments and revelations in this church, excepting my servant Joseph Smith Jun, for he receiveth them even as Moses. And thou shalt be obedient unto the things which I shall give unto him, even as Aaron, to declare faithfully the commandments and the revelations, with power and authority unto the church. The most striking aspect: Smith didn't confront Page directly. He pulled Oliver aside to deliver the claimed revelation and instruct Page to destroy his seer stone. Remarkably convenient for Joseph to produce a revelation every time his authority was challenged, from priestcraft to Page's seer stone, reprimanding those he deemed influenced by Satan. Joseph had to suppress these insurrections, and one method was to divide those speaking. He used to send Oliver to the western frontier to preach to the Native Americans, whom Mormons referred to as Lamanites. D&C 28, 8-10. And now behold, I say unto you that you shall go unto the church to be established among them, and thou shalt have revelations, but write them not by way of commandment. 10. Thou shalt not leave this place until after the conference, and my servant Joseph shall be appointed to preside over the conference by the voice of it, and what he saith to thee thou shalt tell. Oliver was sent away, not of his own volition. Enter Parley P. Pratt. In the late 1820s, Parley P. Pratt and his wife moved from Canaan, New York, to just outside Cleveland, Ohio. Pratt had become affiliated with, and later baptized into, the Reformed Baptist Society, also known as the Campbellites, whose influential preacher was Sidney Rigdon. Pratt sold his property in Ohio and worked as a traveling minister for the Campbellites. Details of Pratt's August 1830 visit to western New York are uncertain. He may have gone to see family or to preach. What we know: he encountered a copy of the Book of Mormon from a Baptist deacon and read it. Convinced, he traveled to Palmyra and conversed with Hiram Smith. Oliver Cowdery, already active as a missionary in New York, baptized Pratt on September 1, 1830, in Seneca Lake. Pratt was ordained as an elder and then traveled to visit his younger brother, Orson Pratt, whom he baptized over 2 weeks later, on September 19, 1830. Pratt is pivotal in exposing the Conbefon Smith and Cowdery were orchestrating. In October 1830, Pratt arrived in Fayette and met Joseph Smith. He was called on a mission with Oliver and Ziba Peterson, an early convert. Peter Whitmer Jr. was also called on this mission, though several LDS sources omit his name. Why is Parley P. Pratt so important? Pratt knew Sidney Rigdon before his conversion to the Church of Christ. On this mission west to the Native Americans, Pratt introduced Rigdon to the Mormon faith, quickly converting him and approximately 150 other Campbellites. The next chapter will introduce Sidney Rigdon and connect him to the broader scheme surrounding the Book of Mormon. A BYU article on the Lamanite mission of 1830 to 1831 note, in 4 weeks in northeastern Ohio, the elders baptized approximately 130 converts, 50 of them from Kirtland. These new members made Kirtland their headquarters. Among the converts were men who would become leaders in the church: Sidney Rigdon, Frederick G. Williams, Lyman White, Newell K. Whitney, Levi Hancock, and John Murdoch. 2 other prominent men, Edward Partridge and Orson Hyde, joined the church soon after the missionaries departed. By the end of 1830, membership in Ohio had reached 300, nearly triple the number of members in New York. December 1830, Sidney Rigdon and Edward Partridge left Ohio for Fayette to meet Joseph Smith for the first time. Ironically, Joseph received revelation instructing him to call both men to high positions within the church. All the individuals mentioned above would become central figures in the Restoration movement, even after Joseph's. The Church of Christ relocated west to Kirtland, Ohio, rather than having new converts move to Fayette. The reasons for this strategic move will become clearer in the next chapter. What the neighbors saw. The LDS perspective tends to dominate the narrative, but it's crucial to hear from those who lived alongside the Smiths during their final years in New York. While some historians state that 45 Palmyra residents signed affidavits in spring 1833, my research uncovered something more striking. I found two distinct sets of witness statements, not from spring, but from November 3rd to December 4th, 1833. Together, these testimonies total 62 individuals who spoke about the Smith family's reputation. Additionally, there are other affidavits from Palmyra residents dating to the family's time in New York before 1830. The testimony of 11 Smith acquaintances, November 3rd, 1833. We, the undersigned, being personally acquainted with the family of Joseph Smith Sr., with whom the celebrated Gold Bible, so-called, originated, state that they were not only a lazy, indolent set of men, but also intemperate, and their word was not to be depended upon, and that we are truly glad to dispense with their society. When 11 acquaintances come together to say the Smiths' word was not to be depended upon, it paints a clear picture. This wasn't an isolated opinion, but a widely held view. A month later, an even harsher condemnation. The testimony of 51 Smith neighbors, December 4th, 1833. We, the undersigned, have been acquainted with the Smith family for a number of years while they resided near this place, and we have no hesitation in saying that we consider them destitute of that moral character which ought to entitle them to the confidence of any community. They were particularly famous for visionary projects, spent much of their time digging for money, which they pretended was hidden in the earth. To this day, large excavations may be seen not far from their residence, where they used to spend their time digging for hidden treasures. Joseph Smith, Sr., and his son Joseph were, in particular, considered entirely destitute of moral character and addicted to vicious habits. Not only were Joseph Smith Sr. and Jr. entirely destitute of moral character, but they were also involved in treasure-digging schemes, an obsession that would later be reworked into the religious context of the Book of Mormon's golden plates. The people of Palmyra weren't fooled. They knew these men, their habits, their behaviors. Large excavations near their home. These weren't signs of visionary religious fervor, but of relentless greed and delusion. Next, the Stafford family, who lived near the Smiths and occasionally worked with them. The testimony of Barton Stafford, November 3rd, 1833. Being called upon to give a statement of the character of the family of Joseph Smith Sr., as far as I know, I can state that I became acquainted with them in 1820 and knew them until 1831 when they left this neighborhood. Joseph Smith Sr. was a noted drunkard, and most of the family followed his example, especially Joseph Jr., who was very much addicted to intemperance. Even after he claimed to be inspired of the Lord to translate the Book of Mormon, he one day got quite drunk while working in my father's field. Finding his legs refused to support him, he leaned on the fence, hanging there for some time. When he finally recovered, he scuffled with a workman who tore his shirt nearly off. His wife, grieved by his conduct, covered him with her shawl to shield him from the sun and escorted him home. The testimony of David Stafford, December 5th, 1833. I have been acquainted with the family of Joseph Smith Sr. for several years. I know him to be a drunkard and a liar, much given to gambling. His boys were a lazy set of fellows, particularly Joseph, who followed his father's example and in some respects was worse. When drunk, he was quarrelsome. Before he went to Pennsylvania to get married, we worked together making a coal pit. During work, a dispute arose between us as he had drunk too much, and some hard words were exchanged. As usual, he was ready to fight, and in the scuffle, he got the advantage of me. A gentleman named Ford intervened, but Joseph turned to fight him instead. Both of us lodged complaints against him, and he was fined for breaching the peace. The Stafford family, close neighbors, offer testimony that aligns perfectly with what we've already heard. These weren't outsiders with an axe to grind. They lived side by side with the Smiths and watched their behavior up close. Barton Stafford recounts Joseph Jr. as a drunken Joseph hanging on a fence, too intoxicated to stand. For someone who claimed divine visions, these weren't the actions of a prophet in the making. The testimony of Parley Chase, December 13th, 1833. I was acquainted with the family of Joseph Smith Sr., both before and after they became Mormons. I can freely state that not one of the male members of the Smith family deserved any credit. They were lazy, intemperate, and worthless men, much given to lying, and often boasted of their skill at it. Their principal occupation was digging for money. As for their gold Bible speculation, they rarely told the same story twice. Joseph Smith, Jr., to my knowledge, bore the reputation of being a liar among his neighbors. By the time we get to Parley Chase, there's a consensus among the neighbors. The Smith family's reputation was beyond repair. Lazy, intemperate, liars. These words repeat in every testimony. Parley mentions how Joseph Jr. was known as a liar, not by a few people, but by everyone who knew him. Yet this same man would go on to claim divine revelations and convince thousands to follow him. The Palmyra Reflector, February 1, 1831. Joseph Smith Sr. had, through misfortune or otherwise, been reduced to extreme poverty before migrating to western New York. His family, large with 9 or 10 children, were never known for much more than ignorance and stupidity, particularly the elder branch, which had a penchant for superstition and a fascination with the marvelous. Despite these overwhelming testimonies, Joseph's brother William tried to defend the family. In a sermon on June 8, 1884, "It has generally been stated that my father's family were lazy, shiftless, and poor, but this was never said by our neighbors, at least not until after the angel appeared and the story of the Golden Bible was told." Then in 1894, William doubled down. "We never heard such accusations until after Joseph told his vision. Our neighbors always knew we were hard-working people. We cleared 60 acres of heavy timber, hardly the task of lazy men." But William's defense crumbles when compared to Joseph Smith Jr.'s own admissions. To Oliver Cowdery in December 1834, "During this time, like most youths, I fell into many vices and follies. However, though my accusers have accused me of gross violations, I have never wronged or injured any man or society of men. My imperfections were those of a light, often vain man, exhibiting foolish and trifling conversation." And in 1839, "I was left to all kinds of temptations, and frequently fell into many foolish errors, displaying the weaknesses of youth and the corruption of human nature, which, I am sorry to say, led me into many temptations offensive in the sight of God." These admissions, written by Joseph himself, cover the period from 1820 to 1823, revealing the very weaknesses that his neighbors accused him of. The church cannot easily sidestep the Smith family's crooked history. Joseph Smith Sr. was entangled in shady business deals and left behind substantial debt, forcing the family to flee their communities multiple times. One striking example: during their move to Palmyra, the family hired a wagon without funds to pay the driver. Once discovered, the driver evicted them, leaving them stranded 100 miles from their destination. This incident is recorded by Lucy Mack Smith herself. The deception is undeniable. Why would they hire a wagon knowing they couldn't pay, only to reveal this once they were nearly at their destination? This isn't poor judgment, it's deliberate deceit involving not only Joseph Sr. and Jr., but also their... William Smith wants us to believe the accusations only began after Joseph's angelic vision. But the weight of evidence tells a different story. Before there was ever talk of golden plates or prophetic visions, the Smiths were notorious for their dishonesty, their drinking, and their failure to contribute meaningfully to their community. Even Joseph Jr. couldn't hide from the truth. His own admissions of many vices and follies confirm what the neighbors had been saying all along. The LDS Church today can try to whitewash the Smith family's history, but the overwhelming evidence is clear. From Joseph Sr. down to Joseph Jr., deception, manipulation, and dishonesty were deeply ingrained in the very foundation of Mormonism.